Hey everyone, welcome. We're going to wait a couple minutes before we get started for people to filter in. Thanks for coming. All right, looks like we have a crowd of people here. More people will probably filter in as the talks go on. Welcome to our, what month is it? April meetup for Filecoin Green. We are really excited to have you here and talk about a lot of really neat work that the community is doing. So this is going to be the agenda for today. I'm Alan. I'm going to give an update on Filecoin Green, on progress. It's been a month. There's been a lot going on. So we're going to talk some about that. We're going to hear about cryptocurrency to reverse deforestation from David Dow from Gainforest. Then we're going to hear immersion cooling for Filecoin storage providers and how you can make some of the most energy efficient storage provider operations and IT equipment in the world. The format for this is that we're each going to give about a 20-minute presentation with some time for questions at the end. If you have questions about particularly that presentation, so my update or Gainforest or immersion cooling, please ask questions during that. Then after that, we're going to stick around for a while and just have sort of a general discussion. The presentations and questions along with those presentations are going to be live streamed. Then if you want to join the discussion and just talk about anything related to Filecoin Green or sustainable crypto, we're happy to talk about that for a while after, and that part won't be live streamed. So I'd like to start by talking about why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. So conveniently, for purposes of sort of refocusing on the broader picture today, yesterday, the IPCC Working Group 2 contribution to the 6th assessment report came out, talking about the effects of global warming. And what this report did is it really broke down at different levels of temperature change, of global temperature change above pre-industrial levels. It broke down what the likely effects are going to be by region. So it got very granular in looking at what specific effects are we going to have of increased temperatures and where are those specific effects going to be. As you might imagine, it's not great. So, they looked at things. Here's sort of a degree of, this gives you sort of a flavor of the degree of granularity that they went to in this report. They looked at, in Australia, they looked at loss of reefs. They looked at cascading impacts on cities and settlements and in Australasia, the whole region. They looked at tourism in North America. They looked at things like tick-borne illness, Lyme disease, and really gave you an idea at this very sort of granular level what the effects of climate change are going to be at different levels of increased temperature. And this is something that we really need to deal with as soon as possible. On the left-hand side, they give you an idea of different scenarios for reducing emissions. and showed that we're on track to, it's basically impossible at this point to not overshoot 1.5 degrees, at least transiently. And what we have to do right now is really decrease the amount of emissions of CO2 equivalent gases that are going into the atmosphere at a really unprecedented rate. And so to a couple sort of quotes from this: vulnerability of ecosystem, people to climate change differs substantially, driven by patterns of intersecting socioeconomic development, unsustainable ocean and land use, inequity, marginalization, historical and ongoing patterns of inequity, such as colonialism and governments. Near-term actions that limit global warming to close to 1.5 degrees would substantially reduce projected losses and damages related to climate change. And so if we can get as close to that limit, that 1.5 degree limit as possible, that would really go a long way to reducing the magnitude of these impacts and save a lot of people. And another, so what does 1.5 degrees mean? Well, so limiting warming to about 1.5 degrees basically requires us to halve our emissions, our global carbon emissions, by 2030. So about 43%. That's in line with what we've known for at least 4 years since this 2018 report on 1.5 degrees. We really have to do this, and we have to do this pretty quickly. A lot of people have been asking, what is the role of crypto in decarbonizing the world? Including the White House published this executive order recently asking everyone in the executive branch to really take a look, every agency in the executive branch to take a look at what is the role of both crypto energy use and what is the broader role of crypto in decarbonization. And so they said this report that each of these executive agencies is going to be working on should specifically address potential uses of blockchain that could support monitoring or mitigating technologies to climate impacts. And that's really where we come in Filecoin Green. Filecoin Green is both aiming to make Filecoin itself verifiably sustainable. So we want to take a holistic view of looking at all of the impacts, all of the environmental impacts associated with Filecoin, including greenhouse gas emissions from energy use, but including other impacts as well, such as what's called Scope 3 emissions, or things like embodied emissions in hardware. And on the other side of that, we want to build the world's best tools to measure and reduce environmental impacts, and we want to build them in a Web3 native way. So people often see these two questions of what is the environmental impact of a cryptocurrency, and then what can cryptocurrency do to limit and reverse climate change, as being separate questions. But at Filecoin Green, really see them the same. We are aiming to turn environmental accounting into a Web3 superpower. We're building tools to verifiably decarbonize Filecoin, but we're building those tools in a more general way than just Filecoin. So if we work on renewable energy markets, we don't want to just build renewable energy markets for Filecoin. We want to build and support them to be built for projects beyond Filecoin and in crypto and in the economy at large. Another major issue here is that currently, when people in the economy at large do environmental accounting, they tend to pay a lot of accountants, look at everything this company does, and they publish a report at the end of their fiscal year, or at the end of the year, or beginning of the next year. If your best source for emissions information is these annual reports, that means that by the time you are working with data from that report, that data is months old, maybe it's a year old. And by building the greenhouse gas protocol to Web3, what we're aiming to do is to reduce the speed at which information related to sustainability flows through the economy to minutes, not months. So by building environmental awareness into actual transactions using programmable money, we're aiming to allow everyone who participates in Web3 and ultimately in the larger economy as Web3 grows to see, if I choose A or if I choose B, what will the environmental impacts of those two choices be, and allow that information to flow in real time through the economy. So that's our goal. So in my sort of quick update on Filecoin Green from the past month, I'm going to talk about new team members we've hired who are amazing. I'm going to talk about new dashboard capabilities. Going to talk about the new website that we just launched, which is a go-to portal for information on everything related to what I was just talking about. And I'm going to talk about the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, which was an amazing event we just had this past month. So I wanted to really welcome three really incredible new team members, Orion, Mark, and Matza. Orion comes from a background where she ran accelerators for Impact Hub, and she's going to be working on the funding funnel for environmental Web3. So if you have a project or if you have a company or a startup, we really want to support you in building those sort of sustainability tools. And yeah, there's some exciting music going on. So we really want to help you build sustainability related companies in Web3. And so Orion's going to be working on that funding funnel. Mark is going to be designing the greenhouse gas protocol as a Web3 protocol. He's done work with the Crypto Climate Accord before to do similar things. And he's going to be looking at really how do we build that programmable sustainability into the Filecoin ecosystem. Matza is an amazing engineer. He's worked on all sorts of things, including environmental project at the intersection of Web3 and environment. He's built a blockchain to track native pollinators, to look at things like not just honeybees, but also native native insects that fly around and that our food supply really depends on. And is bringing this sort of wealth of IT skills and deep interest in the environment to what we're doing here. So welcome to all three of you. And I'm really, really, really excited to have this amazing team. Please also, these are the handles of Orion, Mark, and Matza on Filecoin Slack. So please reach out if you are doing something that is specifically related to their area. And so now I'm going to talk about a couple new dashboard capabilities that we have. So with one of the main focuses of Filecoin Green over the past year and over the past several months is to look at the electricity use of the Filecoin.energy dashboard. Also, I should point out many of the words or phrases that are underlined here are actually links, even though they're not in normal link color. If you go to this URL at the bottom, this tiny URL /filecoin-green-2022-0405, you can download these slides and follow along and click on any of these links because there are a lot of resources and references that we're linking to. So we've been working on trying to understand what the energy use is of the Filecoin blockchain. And we can do that by taking records on the Filecoin chain that record the amount of resources that every single node in the Filecoin network is contributing to the network. And we can translate those into bounds on electricity use. There's a lot to do with the way that Filecoin specifically is designed that allows us to do that, but it gives us a really granular view into what the activity of every node is and what the electricity use corresponding to that activity is. And so here's a map that Matza built a bit ago. So we're able to take nodes in the network using their IPs, using work that this great developer named Jim did. We're able to map those IPs to locations. We're then able to take information on electricity and see at this really sort of granular node by node level of detail how these individual nodes are interacting with local power grids, which is extremely powerful because it allows us to do things like translate that, match the network to renewable energy. So if you know where your network is using energy and you know how much energy is being used by every node in that network at that location, that is the degree of granularity that you need in order to map renewable energy to individual nodes in the Filecoin network. And so we've been doing that. We've been taking energy use for individual nodes. We've been matching them to renewable energy. You can download the certificates. You can look where is that renewable energy being produced. You can look at what specific wind or solar farm is producing renewable energy for this specific node in the Filecoin network. And so I said that the dashboard has included new features. So we added these two new graphs. So on the left, you have a graph of the renewable energy purchased over time. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to see, not just in lines in a spreadsheet, what this renewable energy, what these renewable energy purchases are, but really see cumulatively how much energy has this individual node purchased, and really allow people to do sort of a better analysis of how the Filecoin network is connecting with renewables globally. And then on the right here, we have this other graphic, cumulative energy use. You can compare those and see, okay, what fraction of this node's electricity use over time was covered with renewable energy. So the next thing I wanted to mention is that we've recently launched a website. We call it, it's at green.filecoin.io. This site is great. You can scroll through as you're going from top to bottom. You can scroll through from the upper atmosphere down through layers of forest canopy down to the forest floor. This is your source for information on what I was just talking about. So renewable energy in the Filecoin network. You can find all of the links that you need there. You can find green grants if you are working on a project. You can look for sources to get funding for that project. You can find information on events like this one. You can find new information on news and media coverage and more information on ways to get involved in everything that we're doing. Then the last thing I wanted to mention is the Sustainable Blockchain Summit. We had a really great event at South by Southwest. Here are just a few of the amazing speakers that showed up to talk about different elements of the whole sustainable blockchain movement. And so part of that is what we're doing in Filecoin. We had people from other networks there. We had people who look at, so Alex, who looks at the energy use of cryptocurrencies and different consensus mechanisms in general. We had just sort of representatives from a broad swath of crypto and energy use in crypto itself, as well as from the offsets, from offset world, carbon offset, carbon removal, carbon mitigation worlds, energy worlds. And our goal was really to bring people from all of these different areas of expertise together so we can collaborate on figuring out what the best ways are and what the best practices are to build programmable sustainability into everything we do in Web3. The next Sustainable Blockchain Summit will also include a hackathon. It's going to be in Paris this July. Please stay tuned for more information on that. We will announce it on a bunch of different channels, including the Filecoin Green channel on Slack and to our announcements list. Then here are a bunch of different ways to get involved. Like I said, you can get these slides at tinyurl.com/filecoin-green-2022-0405, which is today's date. Here's just a bunch of different channels that we communicate through. Please, join Phil Green on Filecoin Slack. Please follow Filecoin Green on Twitter. Please apply for a green grant. And I am happy to take questions now if you have any questions on Filecoin Green itself. So I guess if there aren't any questions about Filecoin Green specifically, I will pass the mic off to David Dow from Gainforest, who's going to be talking about what they're doing to use cryptocurrencies to protect forests and reverse deforestation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about one of my biggest passion in life, which is trying to reverse deforestation, stop it and reverse it and make the world a greener place. And we believe at Gainforest, currently a nonprofit in Switzerland, that cryptocurrency is an essential tool for that, and Filecoin, of course, an essential supporter of this initiative. So let me start with the big picture here, like also Alan did with the IPCC report that came out yesterday. This is satellite imagery from Brazil, Mato Grosso, several regions of Brazil. And this satellite imagery is something that is basically the heart of Gainforest, which is transparency. We've lost half of all the world's forest ever since the industrial age. This is a gigantic amount of forest. The natural world has been changing at rates unparalleled in human history. We've never seen a bigger change in the last 30 years than all of humanity before. When it comes to nature, we are struggling with multiple issues here. And as the IPCC report very well said yesterday that released, it's really now or never. Countries have been promising to stop deforestation, to stop the destruction of nature, to stop a lot of the emission sources that results from that, but we really need to act now, otherwise it's really too late. There's no more, we cannot even afford 1 or 2 more years. So why is that important for climate and for humanity? The forest itself, not a lot of people know, actually deforestation is a key driver of the climate crisis. It makes experts estimate the lower bound to be at 18% global anthropogenic emissions, right? But like if the tropical deforestation would be a country, it will be the largest emitter right after China and the US in emissions. There are several regions where and the reason is if you, like a tree, we all know a tree can absorb like carbon. There's a lot of tree planting initiatives out there, but it's also the other way around. All the carbon that's absorbed, when you lit the tree with a fire, it becomes, instead of a carbon like sink, it becomes a carbon bomb, and everything goes up again in the atmosphere. These are enormous tons. It's so much so that the Amazon rainforest, like 2 years ago, turned into a carbon source instead of carbon sink. It's so much deforestation happening that not even the largest rainforest in the world is providing us a net positive anymore. But I've been working in this field for the last 5 years. It's also a human tragedy. The forest is home of 1.2 billion people, some of them the poorest people in the world. They rely on the forest. They've been living there since ancient times. And deforestation is one of the worst things that can happen to them because it not only destroys their home, it also takes their lives. There are miners who are illegally deforesting the lands, destroying everything that they rely on. And it's a crisis of unprecedented scale, causing a lot of refugees in many countries, and it will hit us soon too. It will feel the consequences as well. So to really show what one of the drivers of deforestation is, my team and I recently came back from Gran Chaco in Paraguay, which is one of the largest rainforests in the world, right below the Amazon rainforest in South America. And you can see here, these are drone imageries we took of. This is a street in the Gran Chaco that takes hundreds of cattle, maybe go back a little bit, hundreds of these cattle trucks. And these cattle trucks basically, like cattle farming is one of the main reasons of deforestation. It's very profitable, like the only business that is profitable, maybe even the major industrial change in these countries. So they want to maximize like cattle ranges. And every day, hundreds of these trucks are walking through these narrow streets on the northern border of Paraguay to Bolivia. And you can see on the right side, the cattle ranches deforesting large amounts of forest. On the left side is, for example, one of the few national parks that is left over. So, of course, like we know, like our decision makers, our policy makers, our leaders know that deforestation is an insanely important topic regarding climate, regarding biodiversity and human life. So we've implemented payment schemes called results-based payment, which is basically a fancy word of saying, if you protect that forest, I'm gonna pay you money, right? $25 billion have been reserved through programs such as REDD+ from the United Nations, but so far, few of the money ever arrived to communities that have been protecting and fighting for nature. The reason is very, very simple. On paper, it sounds really great. If you get paid, if you can pay local communities, they can stop chopping off the forest. They can start having sustainable ecotourism as alternative business, for example. But there's just no trust, because you see, in order to receive the money, communities need to report like how much they protected. These governments don't really trust it, so they implement these third-party implementers. So these third-party reporters and verifiers, they go to these areas of the local communities, measure the trees, measure all the data, and guess how much they cost? They cost $35,000 just to get started. This is an amount no one of these local communities, especially in the global south, can even afford to get started, right? Like they just can't. First of all, it's lots of paperwork, so it's like hundreds of pages. They're mostly like very technical, and you expect those people to fill these paperworks out yourself. Then you're charging them a 30K sum. So you can see the hurdles for especially small landowners is immense. And that's just because of the reporting, and there's no trust to send the money and the impact. So my background, I'm originally an AI researcher. And in the last couple of years, we looked into that problem of reporting and why it's so expensive to report, because we all know that there's a lot of data out there, right? Like, we are living in a digital age. We have a lot of satellite data. We have almost everyone here owns or has operated a drone before in the global north. We have field-based data of forests, and even we have genomic data of the soil. Can't we leverage all the data to basically tell, okay, how healthy is the environment? How well protected is my land? And that's exactly what we did. So in the last couple of years, we implemented algorithms that are now all open source, and platforms that leverage satellite data time series such as this. We can clearly see that, sure, it's we see deforestation happening, but we also see that there's a certain pattern happening that can be recognized by machine. We implemented rapid drone kits that allow you and communities to also investigate areas that maybe a satellite cannot see through, especially high resolution areas. So we gave out drones into local communities, trained them to use these cheap drones. And within 10 minutes, for example, you create a 3D map of an area 500 by 500 meters using our technology tech stack. And what that allows us to do is, instead of having these expensive reporting and monitoring demands that you have to go on the field and charge communities so much money, we have an automated approach of assessing how much the impact of a community is. For example, here, this is an internal dashboard we're using in our team that shows in red predicted emissions over the last years. The more orange, the more emissions there is. And this is, for example, a community we're working with closely. It's in the indigenous community of the Kayapo, which is encircled here. And they've been protecting an area twice the size of the UK in forests. And they're protecting it so efficiently. You can see it here in these time series that everything, all the deforestation is happening around the areas, which can be seen in the red graph on the left. And they themselves have only a small amount of emissions. So we can see success clearly using satellites. So then the question is we have all the data. We started to implement successful analysis. How can we merge all these things together to really bring impact and also funding to the communities at the place? And that's where Gainforce comes in. And I would like to introduce you to Gainforce in this short video.
The natural world is disappearing fast. Humanity is consciously destroying our planet's life support systems, upon which we all depend, and time is running out. But there is hope. Everywhere, conservationists and local communities are working tirelessly to stop and reverse the damage we're inflicting, but they can't do it alone. So what if we could harness the power of technology to unlock limitless resources for the restoration of nature? Gainforest is a cutting-edge decentralized fund. It uses artificial intelligence and blockchain technology to reward sustainable nature stewardship. It works like this. Gainforest generates NFTs, unique digital assets that correspond to land areas all over the world. NFTs turn traditional donations into transparent investments. Through smart contracts, anyone can purchase an NFT by pledging a regular donation to protect and restore these areas. The smart contract then safely stores donations in a decentralized fund. Gainforest uses satellite imagery, drone technology, and artificial intelligence to monitor the area and tell us whether nature is thriving. As land is protected and preserved for longer and longer, donations will automatically be unlocked and released to the communities that have been responsible for protecting it. Simultaneously, donors are able to trace the impact of donations whilst their NF trees increase in value as habitats are restored. Gain Forest will revolutionise the world of conservation. Together, we can fund the protection and restoration of our natural world, preserving it for us and our children.
Oh. So before we had this system, there's a donation or there's a promised donation, but we really don't know what the impact of that is, right? There's no trust on the impact. So this is the traditional system we have, donation, but questionable impact. What Gainforce is doing is we turn this system around. We say, okay, we measure the impact. So you can donate, and donation goes into an escrow account, which is blockchain based. So it's living in the blockchain. It's neither in your wallet nor is it in the wallet of landowners. And the moment the landowners have impact that we can verify through our technology, that donation gets automatically released to the landowners. Not only that, because of that system, we can also provide you as a donor if the impact is actually released in a receipt that can be stored in the blockchain, and that receipt is currently a non-fungible token that can also be traded in the secondary market. So enough talk. Let's quickly show some visuals, some technicals. So this is an area we are currently pioneering with the Paraguayan government of environmental Ministry of Environment. And this is Paraguay's largest national park, which I've shown. So for example, the trucks, and so we've been seeing them here in this area. So using satellite data, we are able to detect various features of this area. For example, how healthy the vegetation is, how much soil carbon is estimated to be stored in, but most importantly, we can detect the rate of deforestation happening. We can show it here. Paraguay, unfortunately, not a lot of people know, but has the highest deforestation rate in the world. Everything that is red is basically deforestation. Starting from 2000, we can see the spread of these large, enormous farms and cattle farms, ranches, almost like a cancer in the whole country, removing the size of the UK in forest when it comes to the Chaco in the last 20 years. We can use high resolution satellite data that we can have on a monthly basis to understand the changes and track it over time. So we can see, for example, here, this is 7 years ago, where we basically had no farms on the left, no farms on the right. And now this is, for example, a satellite image that we just took last month. And you can see the extension of the farms here growing faster. This area, if Gainforce wouldn't like do a pilot project here in this area, it would have been deforested in the next six months. So we went there, we said, hey, stop, we have like an opportunity for you. And they so far paused the deforestation of 1,000 hectares of land. So how do we do this? What we're gonna do is, currently Gainforce runs on Solana because of the energy efficiency of the protocol. And what we're doing is basically, this is the monitoring of the area, of the same area I showed you. And any donor can just donate, for example, let's say one SOL. Hopefully that goes through. And looks good. Transaction approved on the left side. And you can see, for example, we will not, this money will be released in 90 days, but only if our monthly satellite imagery analysis detects that the forest cover never falls below this red threshold, 75% of forest cover. All the data, the analysis is stored in Filecoin using estuary, which you can find here. So all the raw data can be stored, is found here. And all the transaction IDs can be found here as well. For example, we have also implemented local sensors such as drone imagery, recent drone imagery, as well as wildlife cams. So this is, for example, stored here, which detects a very cute capybara recently that walked past by. And now the question is, okay, why should anyone donate? Clearly, we believe in our team, it's the best donation system that has ever existed. We can clearly track the impact and everything, but still donations come only from the heart, right? And Gainforce tries to sprinkle a little bit more incentives in it. So what you get is basically an NF3. Depending on the amount of your donation, we have limited NF3s, for example, 100 for the top tier and no limits for any kind of amount of donations. And these NF3s, the moment it successfully gets passed through, you receive them in your wallet. This is, for example, an NF3 that is the new site images, like a proof that you donated, with all the analysis data which we have analyzed using our algorithms and stored inside here. And this is something you can, for example, send. If you donate a little bit more, you can get this really cute capybara I just showed you as an NF3 showcased, and also be able to send through transactions. And if you donate even more, we have collaborations with indigenous artists that show beautiful artwork and photography from the area. And we believe that the trick is that if the moment there's trust in our system, we believe that the floor price of the NF3s will rise over time. And this will, of course, economically incentivize more donations. And therefore, we hope to optimize more donations in that sense. Going back to my final slide, and this is something which is very close to my heart. This project is not about carbon numbers. This project is not about bringing like a number down to 1.5. This project is about people. And this is, I think, something that a lot of people discussed during the discussion, that I've been working in this field for the last 5 years, and I've heard a lot of technology projects that have never ever visited one of these sites that they are allegedly protecting. Because the moment you visit these sites, you understand what is actually at stake. We have 7 years left, right? But some people already have no time left, because they've been experiencing large changes in temperature and the destruction of the forest. For them, it's even more urgent than us. So for example, here, this is pictures from our last trip in Paraguay, where we're in the next coming days, we will announce an official press release where we will confirm that we are the very first green crypto project that is approved by a state, by the government of Paraguay, to support its existing national defenses against illegal deforestation, as well as helping them to reforest. On the right side, for example, the images are from the Kayapu project, the indigenous tribe I told you, which is protecting twice the size of the UK in forests. And we've been also collaborating and learning a lot from them. One of the reasons, for example, we changed from Ethereum originally to Solana is because of the energy concern that we have brought up and discussed with them in many stakeholder exchanges. So we believe this problem can only be solved with technology, but also with indigenous wisdom and with local communities at hand in hand. So with that, I want to close. And if there's any question, I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I love how in Gainforest, right, you're taking technology and taking public data, and you're really using that to show how these donations like actually affect local people on the ground, right? And it's really like we're not just techno-utopians who assume that once we use AI and satellites and drones and blockchains, it's just going to like solve all these problems, but you really like put in the work to really understand like what specific problems are we trying to solve, and like what is the human element to that. And it's
yeah,
amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super important. Like, I come from a very technical background, and I've been like doing tech basically my first like 20 years of my life. But the moment I actually went to the forests, talked to the stakeholders, I understand that like there are things you cannot learn from books or school or university courses. You need to really, really see it. Like it's donations is a business speaking to the heart, right? So I think it's really important to make clear that it's not carbon numbers or like carbon certificates that rely on what we're doing here as a community. It like stopping deforestation, reversing deforestation, saves human lives, protects a disaster in a human scale, right? Because nature really doesn't care if there's climate change. Nature will recover. Nature will come back. It's us humans that should really, really care about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we're not saving the Earth. The Earth is going to be fine. It's the people
Exactly.
on the Earth that
Absolutely. The Earth doesn't like that. It's actually probably like better for nature if like, I don't know. Let's see.
There was a question in the chat. How can I donate or how can I buy an NFT?
So we are right now finishing the last itches of the system and planning to have the public launch of the Paraguay project as well as the Kayapu project by end of the summer. And so just follow us on Twitter. I'll say Gainforest now. That's our Twitter handle. And gainforest.net is our website. And we will keep you folks up to date anytime there's the launch. And of course, there's also going to be a Discord channel soon. I mean, that's a must, but we wanted to make sure that the technology and everything is working before we go through.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you, David. So next, let's pass the mic to Chris, who's going to be talking about energy efficiency in IT systems and specifically immersion cooling in Filecoin storage provider systems.
Thanks, Alan. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Let me share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see that.
Not yet.
Let's try. Has it come through yet?
Yeah, that's good.
This one. Excellent. Okay. So let me just share this presentation. There we go.
Awesome.
So I'm Chris Ward-Jones, COO of Blocks.io. So we're a decentralized and private cloud company. We focus and always have focused quite heavily on innovation. That's everything from the infrastructure right through the technology stack as well. And to that end, we are founding members of the Open Grid Alliance, and we have a Web3 native innovation hub based in Cambridge. So as Alan's previously mentioned, what we're talking about today is immersion cooling and how we can leverage that technology for the benefit of the industry. So I think these slides can be a bit wordy, so I'll just try and skip through those bits. But I think it's quite important to set the scene first. Not just talk about the technology stack, etc., but how we consume that technology. So it's widely, I would imagine that everybody on this call, is more than well aware of the rate of change which the industry is growing. So just some basic facts here. For instance, we're expanding rapidly. The current thirst for machine data and human-based data is growing at a phenomenal rate. If you look at machine-based data, that's growing even more rapidly than human-based data. We're talking about a 50 times multiplier on the rate of growth. And we're already at a position right now where the industry as a whole is consuming somewhere around about, depending on where you get stats from, but consuming somewhere around about 4% of the world's energy and contributing between about 2 and 3% of the CO2 emissions, which is staggering, really, when you think about it, especially when you apply the rate of growth that we're currently looking at to the industry, because those numbers are only going to increase, and it's going to be exponential, right? The rate of change is going to be quite dramatic over the next 10 to 20 years. So if we look at how we consume data and what we need to build in order to deliver those services. So taking a step back and not just looking at the servers, if we take a look at the actual buildings that we put them in, the data centers, they're all built with the same approach in mind, and that's using air cooling. And these data centers are incredibly, they're large and expensive to build. And when you look at the running costs of those facilities and the build costs, a very large chunk of that is soaked up by the deployment of the cooling infrastructure, the air-based cooling infrastructure. And then you've got to look at also the carbon footprint of producing, crack units, etc., and so on, and refrigerants, and it all adds up. And that's before you've even switched anything on. And there's other factors as well that people don't necessarily consider when it comes to data centers. So data centers not only consume a huge amount of electricity, what a lot of people don't realize is that they consume a huge amount of water also. Specifically because lots of data centers use a technique that's known as evaporative cooling. So they evaporate off water to get the desired cooling effect. And when you think that there's billions of people in the world today who are, you know, living in energy and water poverty, it's quite staggering to think that we consume so much water just to cool infrastructure and technology. Having done an audit several years ago, so these numbers are a little bit out of date, but there's a number in there just down towards the bottom. But if you consider that 800 data centers in California, you know, an audit of those data centers revealed that between them collectively they were consuming the same amount of water as 158,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single year. That's just a staggering amount of resource that effectively we're wasting if there's a better way of doing it, right? And there are much better ways of doing it. You know, people have been cooling technology in various different ways for decades. It's just that the industry today dictates that we use air because it's deemed as being easier, and you know, easier is not necessarily right. So how do we cool stuff? Well, today we do this. Really, we do traditional fan-based cooling. Everyone's familiar with a fan if they've popped open their PC. You've got fans in your case. You've got fans, you know, on your CPU, on the heat sinks. Fans that cool your GPUs. And then if you look at, you know, data centers, and of course, as well as those fans, you have the large crack units in the computer rooms that push huge amounts of cold air around as well. And then you've got the crack units themselves, etc. And then you've got the fans on the roof that suck all the hot air out and disperse it to atmosphere, which again isn't necessarily a great thing to do, right? Because if you pump a lot of heat into the atmosphere, you know, you're now making it the atmosphere's problem. Whereas if you could do something creative with that heat and reuse it elsewhere, you know, within an insulated building, that's a very different impact to just pumping it straight out to atmosphere. Something else that's, well, another approach that's popular at the moment is direct liquid cooling. So this is where we take, effectively, these would be like little heat sinks that you would apply to individual components within a server or within your PC at home. And then what you would do is you'd take a water or coolant loop, and what you would do is you would cycle a coolant through these heat sinks, and you would effectively draw the heat away from those components. It's a common approach for CPUs, GPUs, and memory. But if we want to be realistic, it's more the CPU. And in the data center, we do see the likes of, you know, Amazon doing some of this stuff with, and Facebook doing some of this stuff with their more, you know, thirsty chips. But it does have or it does beg the question what you do with everything else, because anything that's not considered, you know, a high power consuming component and you know, high heat emitting component still, you know, vents the heat into the data center, still, you know, requires fans in the box to push the heat out of the server, and then more fans throughout the building and the infrastructure to push the cold air through and pull the hot air out. So it's a step in the right direction. It's not a very big step though, so it's not really making any noticeable difference. And then if the opposite end of the scale, we have what we call total liquid cooling. So that's immersion cooling. It sounds counterintuitive, but what we do is we take the IT, all of the IT, and we submerge it in a liquid. The first thing you think would happen is it would go pop, right? Because, you know, computers and water, you know, electricity and water doesn't mix. But it's not water. It's a dielectric fluid. It doesn't conduct electricity. And you know, anyone who's accidentally taken a breath underwater while swimming will know that water is a lot denser than air, right? So, and because of that density, it's an awful lot more effective at conducting and moving heat. You know, it's in the order of about 4,000 times more effective of carrying heat away from electrical components. And with that in mind, we'll dive into a little bit more detail. So there's two main approaches to immersion cooling. One is what we call a bathtub type approach, where you lower your technology into the bathtub and cool it. And the other is more akin to traditional data center racks, where we have rack mountable IT, which is encased in a chassis that contains the coolant within it. There's pros and cons with both approaches, and there's a number of people, using different applications. We use a dielectric liquid. Others use or have been using oil. So if you look back through time, old mainframe computers, they used to use a very similar sort of approach, but it was cycling oil through their components. Oil. There's implications with using oil, right? So you've got the environmental impact, etc. So on. It doesn't last very long, and you have to dispose of it. Again, environmental impact. It has a flash point, so if there's a fire. There's lots of there's pros and cons to the approach. Dielectric fluid, on the other hand, it's non-corrosive, it's non-toxic, it has a 20-year lifespan. You can drink it if you want. I've tried it. It doesn't taste very nice, so I don't really recommend it. So our chosen approach at the moment is dielectric fluid. We've done both the rack-mounted option, and we're currently working on a submerged variant as well. And with that in mind, what is it? So this is our building in Cambridge. Here we have some racks in a data center. Standard, I say data center, this is actually a room that we built as an MMR MEV room where some of the connectivity comes into the building, but it's where we used to benchmark the kit that we were going to test with. So this is a standard air-cooled room. It's no more efficient than any other data center facility. Well, I suppose this one is slightly more efficient because it's a smaller room, right? It's not for customer kit. So these are standard data center racks. They're vented, and there's cold air pushed into the room, and the hot air is extracted. On the other hand, opposite this room, we built a lab. Apologies for a slightly fuzzy photo, but we built a lab, and here you'll see there's some racks installed in the lab. And the first thing you'll notice about these racks is there's no vents in the door. They're solid. There's no airflow through these whatsoever. And the reason for that is because there's no air conditioning in the room, and we do not need to push cold air through these servers to keep them cool. So we thought the best way to demonstrate that was to lock them in a metal box, because the worst thing you can do to technology is lock it in a metal box and cook it. But in this case, of course, that's exactly what we're not doing. And to demonstrate, this is what it looks like. So what we did is we took the servers that we benchmarked in air, and the benchmarking process took several weeks. So we run workloads, we'd have them idle, then we'd run specific workloads for several weeks, and we'd change them, then we re-baseline and then run a slightly more intense workload and so on, until we were actually running these servers at like 100% for a period of weeks. But we took that IT, we took the very same components that we tested in air to make sure that there was no differences between any of the kit, and we took those actual components and we submerged them, we put them in this immersive solution. So we're using exactly the same IT components, and what you can see here is actually a Supermicro server, believe it or not. What you can see here, just along this line here, this is and you can probably see it around some of the cables there, around here. But this is actually, and you can see it at the back here, this is immersed in a liquid. And that is how we keep the kit cool. This is it powered up and working, as you can see, energized. What we do is we have a variable speed pump here, which picks up the coolant, the liquid in the chassis. It takes that coolant and it distributes it, as you can see here, through this pipe work, which goes to this heat sink here on the CPU, and there's another heat sink just over here behind these cables on another CPU, and then you can probably just make out the pipe work coming back from those heat sinks, which we then extract out of the back of the chassis into a heat exchanger. So there's two ways of doing this. We can have a heat exchanger in the box, or we can have a heat exchanger outside of the box. But the point being, we extract the heat from the hottest components. So the liquid in the unit here kind of acts a bit like a thermal battery. And then what we do is we pick up that coolant, we take it across the hottest components, and then directly from the hottest components, we take it out of the box and straight into a heat exchanger. which you can see here. So these are the sealed units, as you can see. These are the heat exchangers. These are actually rather large because we built this rig during lockdown and we couldn't get the right size heat exchangers due to supply issues. So the heat exchangers are actually about the size of a matchbox. So these are somewhat overkill. But what you can see here is obviously the hot coolant, the hot dielectric fluid is taken out the chassis through a heat exchanger and then it's pumped back into the chassis. So you've got a sealed loop here effectively of dielectric fluid. So the dielectric fluid that's in here never leaves. It just cycles around its heat exchanger. And then the heat exchanger is also connected to this manifold, which you can see here. If we had heat exchangers inside the box, we'd just connect them direct to the manifold. The manifold then, that's connected to the heat recovery system. The heat recovery system effectively draws the heat out of the heat exchangers. It doesn't look very shiny, granted, but we built it like this so that people could see it, touch it, feel it, and understand how it works. We actually condensed all of this down into a single rack. So whilst it looks quite big right now, it's purely so people can see it and see how it works. So what we have effectively is we have a thermal store. We've actually got some variable speed pumps on the other side of this pipework here. So this is the flow and return from those heat exchangers that we saw previously. And there's another heat exchanger on this side, outside of the racks of this heat recovery system. So this side is a water glycol mix. And what we do is we capture the heat and we store it in here. And from there we can make, as you can see, we can make hot water, etc. You know, we can do anything we like with that heat. We can repurpose it for heating, etc., and so on. So as opposed to it being a waste product that people were previously having to deal with, you know, find a solution for, we're now treating it as a byproduct and we're doing something else with it. So, you know, instead of paying to make cold air, push it under the floor, which is what you do in a data center, you push it up through the vents. God knows why. I know they're not dropping cold air down, but hey, it's just the way the data centers are built. So instead of spending all that money and burning all that energy to make cold air to cool these servers down, what we're now doing is we're seeing that heat as a byproduct, and we're treating it somewhat differently. You know, I'm now making hot water, so I don't have to pay to make hot water. And I'm now heating my building. And it's all completely, this is, apologies for the screen capture didn't work very well. And it's all completely tunable, customizable. So based on what the system is doing at any one point in time, based upon the workloads that you're running, you can, and all of this is automatic, but you can set the parameters and determine the behavior. So you can increase the heat in your servers, for instance, if you wanted to get more heat that you can then recover and repurpose. You can slow down the variable speed pumps on one side of the circuit or the other. So one side of the heat exchanger starts getting hotter than the other. So you may be pulling less heat out of the IT due to lower workloads, but still wanting to generate a higher heat output for, say, your heating, etc. All of that completely customizable and completely automated and can be done with a mouse click. It's really simple. So yes, it does work. You can apply this technology really easily. We have a great big event space in our building in Cambridge. Anyone who's looked at my LinkedIn profile lately will see the event that we did. There was a big crypto event, a blockchain event we did a few weeks ago. And that event space, which is really expensive to heat in winter, now isn't, because that's one of the banks of radiators that we put in. So those 4 racks that you saw previously, we can run 4 racks full of live kit, no air conditioning, no cooling costs effectively whatsoever. And we can heat that massive space with it, and we can generate as much hot water as we need in the building. So, you know, it's not just saved on our cooling costs, it's saved on our heating costs as well. Does it work? Well, yes, it does. We have some, this was testing that we did with a single node initially, just to see how it worked. And as you can see, when we switch, oops, that was my fault, I do apologize. When we switch it on over a period of time, you know, we increase roughly around about sort of 11 degrees in the heating circuit. You know, we see a dip here. This is actually the heat recovery side of the circuit, so it smooths out the temperature. This is what we're seeing inside the chassis effectively. So this is the secondary loop, and as you can see, as workloads and things change, you get a very real reaction. But the heating circuit itself acts like a thermal battery, so it smooths out those changes that you see over here. And that spike that you saw, or that dip rather, around about 11 o'clock here in the evening. And yes, we were running tests that late at night, is us sucking a load of heat out of, at the same time, out of that cooling, or rather that heating circuit, and putting it into the hot water. So we capture all the metrics so we can see exactly what we're doing. We can see how well it works. And that was as an example with a single node, and that showed how we could create or heat water by 11 degrees just using a single node, right? So that's substantial. Do you imagine what it's like when you scale it up, right? In real world terms, so with all the kit that we tested, we averaged this out, and what you can see here in blue, this is the energy that the technology, the servers themselves consumed when we baselined them in air. Then, having taken exactly the same components from the same servers, broken them down, reassembled them in liquid, and run exactly the same tests for the same durations again, this is what we see for the energy consumed in liquid. And as you can see, the difference is quite staggering, right? If you look at the 50%, average server utilization is probably around 50%. You know, you're looking at about 46, just over 46% saving in energy. If you're running a data center that consumes 5 megawatts, well, you're now consuming 2.5 megawatts. The impact, the carbon impact, etc., of having to produce half the amount of electricity, it is truly staggering when you think about it. And this is, this sort of percentage difference is near enough maintained throughout. In fact, when we averaged everything out, we were just shy of 50% energy saving. That was averaging out all the different workloads that we tested. In terms of energy reduction, so these servers were consuming just short of about 900 watts under full load. So if you look again at the 50% utilization, we're not far off, almost the halfway point. Not quite, but it is a significant saving in power. When you boil it out to actual watts and you understand what each server is consuming, if you think, for instance, co-location contracts are usually priced per kilowatt, right? So if you're paying a certain price per kilowatt, and here, for instance, you're saving almost half a kilowatt, if you've got 10 servers, you're paying the same sort of co-location rates, for say 5 servers, because you're consuming half the power. The other thing to note is that density increases massively as well. So we can take this sort of technology and we can put it into a much smaller space, because we can cool an awful lot more technology in a much smaller footprint using immersion cooling, because it's so much more efficient. So our building in Cambridge currently has a megawatt going into it. We're planning to deploy immersion cooling infrastructure in what is approximately about 20%, 25% of the ground floor. It's a 3-story building. And in that one installation there, we will soak up the entire megawatt. Now, the whole building is built for a megawatt over 3 floors. We're using just part of 1 floor, or we will be, incidentally, for Filecoin. And we'll be using all the energy that's delivered to the building today. We've got more coming in, but we'll be using all that energy in a much smaller footprint. And of course, we won't be sacrificing any of that energy for cooling, and increasing our carbon footprint. Percentage of energy saved, yeah, just another graph that just shows you how much we saved. I mean, lots of servers sit idle all of the time. They shouldn't, but they do. So that's quite staggering. We've saved more than 60% of our energy when an idle is, or when a server is sitting and everything really, you know, I think it speaks for itself. Some key points. Personally, I think this point here is quite interesting, because whilst we're talking about saving 40%, 50%, so on 60% when idle, what we need to really think about is, I don't know how many people on this meeting are aware of a metric called PUE. It's a power usage effectiveness, but it's how we work out how efficient a data center is. So what we've looked at the moment is how we can save energy and reduce our carbon footprint burning power inside the server, as it were. What we haven't really thought about, you know, is how that translates to an entire building. So if we remove the need to run crack units, if we remove the need to run, you know, DX chillers on the roof and chill water, there's additional energy savings that can be made there. Another huge energy saving that people don't think about is to immerse these servers, you have to take all the fans out. So, you know, just within the server itself, anything between sort of like, you know, 25 and sort of 45-ish% of your energy consumption, depending on the load that you're running, is actually the fans just spinning inside the server. So you remove all those fans, you remove the fans from the data center. And if you built specifically for immersion cooling, not trying to retrofit into an existing space, for instance, then your energy reduction, you're now looking at around about 70 to 80%, which is staggering. And also a 75% or thereabouts reduction in space, because of the density is that much greater, which in turn has a knock-on effect, right, with the carbon footprint, you know, to build the building, to produce the cement, etc., and so on. So there's lots of really obvious reasons as to why, you know, we should be going down this path, and it's exactly why we are, right? It's like I said, we're building a space in Cambridge specifically for immersion cooling, and it's as part of the Filecoin work that we're doing. So whilst I said at the start of this presentation, you know, this was done using standard IT, etc., 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 we are building Filecoin based solutions now using this technology. Just some highlights, which I think we've touched on already, so you probably don't want me walking them through you again. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it, unless anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for walking us through that. That's awesome. Like with immersion cooling, it's just really incredible, right? How you can take power usage effectiveness of, you know, which typically is like 1.5 or so, and bring it down to, you know, you're wasting, you know, you're using a third of the total energy in your for cooling, right?
Yeah, and I think the power usage, I think the PUE metric is broken. Actually, it doesn't. It's people can manipulate it, and PUE doesn't really apply when you think about immersion cooling, because one of the things that I touched on just a minute ago was taking the fans out of the box. So straight away, the box that you're trying to work out your PUE metrics for, the technology that you're using, is now way more efficient. So it skews that PUE metric compared to running the same box in a data center. So, you know, something that I'd like to do is work out how many, you know, kilowatts per tib sealed or something like that. A much more useful metric. You know, how much energy do you consume for a given workload? Just my thoughts.
I feel like that's something that we're running into a lot of in a lot of places, and some of the work that we're doing is like a lot of these standards were written a couple decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way better ways of doing things now, and we need to figure out how to express that.
Yeah, more than happy to work with you guys to do a sort of like, you know, kilowatt per tib type metric and see where we get to, see how efficient it can be.
Anyone else have questions for Chris?
Silence.
Harold in the chat wants to know, how would you apply immersion cooling to rack with servers?
How would you apply immersion cooling? Do you mean an existing rack with existing servers in it, air-cooled servers? Because if you do, yes, you can actually do that. So with the rack mountable solution that we have, and we've tested several of them. Let me just whiz back through here. So here we go. So rack mountable solution. These are sealed units, and there's plenty of room in this rack for air-cooled kit as well. The only problem with doing that, of course, is that whilst yes, you can do that. Oh, and I should say that, you know, you'd either put all this stuff down the bottom or at the top, wherever. Probably makes more sense to put it down the bottom and the air-cooled stuff at the top, where you don't have all this stuff in the way. But as I did point out before, you can do away with this because we can just have the heat exchanger in each one of these immersion cooled nodes instead and just connect it as manifold. But it does allow you to put air-cooled and immersion-cooled servers in the same rack. The only problem with that approach, of course, is that you're still pushing cold air around the building to keep the air-cooled servers cool. So you're probably best building a dedicated room for your air-cooled and a dedicated room for your immersion-cooled until such point as you can transition to fully immersion-cooled. Hopefully that makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you. If a storage provider wants to build an immersion cooling operation, should they reach out to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're immersing storage. We have to be with Filecoin, right? We're immersing a lot of storage. So yeah, by all means, reach out.
Perfect. All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you, Chris.
No problem.
Yeah, I think we'll stop the live stream now. So thank you to everyone who watched over live stream on YouTube. I think we'll keep the